just wanted to talk about this place called Hell's Gate. It's in Bridgeport, Texas. The description of the haunting is as follows. I went there with some friends. We went and parked our cars about 40 yards from the old wooden bridge, which is about 30 to 40 feet long. It was around midnight to 1 in the morning. We walked across the bridge. Story goes, once you have crossed the bridge, you have just gone through Hell's Gates. From there, you have entered the demon's domain. Anyway, we walked across the bridge as I said, and went up a small foothill covered with tree branches. As soon as we got to level ground, we were on a dirt road covered by tall grass, which was about 10 to 15 feet high on each side. At the time, it was very warm. We walked about 30 feet, and we were past the tall grass. As you walk down further down the road, it got colder and colder, and you can sense a presence. Well, I decided to look to my right in an open field, just in front of a wooded area. There was a small black figure in the shape of a man, about 4 feet tall, with glowing red eyes. As we walked further down the road, I could swear I saw him keeping up with us in the pasture. Once we got quite a bit away from the bridge, we came up on a log going across the road. The log was very long and covered the entire road. Even with 10 to 12 people there, it was much too heavy to move, so we left it there. Now keep in mind that it was cold enough to wear a heavy jacket at this point, but the strange thing is, it was the middle of the summer in Texas. Well, me and a couple friends decided to walk back to the bridge, and the others wanted to keep walking. So we turned around and started heading back for the bridge. I then looked to my left and noticed that the figure that was following us earlier started walking with us, and that kind of freaked us out a little. So we started running. The figure kept up with us the entire time, and as soon as we got to the tall grass, it was gone. I then turned around and walked past the tall grass to see if I could see it, but it wasn't there. So we went to the bridge and waited for the others. After about 45 minutes they returned, so we all decided to leave. We got in our cars and went driving around some. We turned down this road and that road, then turned down the same road we were walking on, and all of a sudden, we stopped at the place where the log was across the road. It was gone. After that, we then drove down to the bridge and got out and decided to go somewhere else. So we turned the cars around and started leaving when all of a sudden we stopped. So I got out of the car and looked around and saw that the log was once again blocking the road. I thought we were trapped in and I got scared. So we turned around once again and drove back to the bridge. We all got out and decided to go back and try to move the log with one of our vehicles, because one was a big 4x4 truck. But when we got to where the log was, it was gone, so we left in a hurry. And since then, we have returned a few times and seen the log in the road, but we never drove our cars down the road ever again. I know this might sound kind of silly, the whole log incident, and maybe you might find the apparition story a little bit crazy too, but believe me, this is 100% factual. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true, honestly, but you can just take my word for it, as it's all you have. Thank you. Oh God, where do I even start? I've always been afraid of the paranormal. I always believed that me seeing or experiencing the other side would be the end of me. I can now say that it has only made me stronger and even braver. All my life, I've lived with Jesus in my heart, being a born-again Christian. Whenever I felt alone, or not alone, I would say a prayer and feel alright. I have a few stories with ghosts, or let's just say the paranormal. Keep in mind that I am only 16 years old. 1 year ago, there was a spot in my town where a bunch of woods and a giant field was cleared out and made many wealthy homes. It was in a historical area where there is a lot of Native American memorabilia and such. Anyway, one of my friends had just moved into one of the homes, and he had a few of us sleep over. So we were in his finished basement playing with a Ouija board and listening to the radio. It was pretty corny, and nothing happened, so we put it away. We all got freaked out, even though we were all sports jocks, and threw it in a little patch of woods he had in his backyard. So we went back in his house, just hanging out, with our sleeping bags all set up on the floor. We finally shut the radio off, and now being about 11 p.m., it was late enough to do some damage, so we got eggs and toilet paper and went into the new neighborhood and wrecked the houses and cars. We got back at about 12:30 a.m. and decided to go to bed. We turned out the lights, the radio was already off, and went to sleep. The radio turned on, playing the station that we were listening to previously. It then changed to someone singing Ring Around the Posies, pocket full of posies. We got so freaked out because it was definitely not the radio. It sounded like a little girl. Then the radio shut off, and we heard a nasty sound. It sounded like a distorted, whirling and humming noise. Radio started blasting, and the lights began turning on and off, flashing really quickly. We were so scared, not one of us moved or said a word. When the lights were flashing, I saw in the corner of my eye a dark, tall-colored man. There was no shadows when the lights turned on, and he almost looked transparent. I know this because after I saw it in the corner of my eye, I looked straight at it, but the next time the light went out, then back on again, and moved to a different part of the room. It looked like an Indian, but at that time, I was not so sure. The next morning, after no sleep, we found ourselves in the living room on the main floor. We told my parents all about it, and they said they hadn't heard a thing. When we went outside, not a single drop of egg or toilet paper was on any of the surrounding houses, except for my friends. I'm not lying. This is 1,000% true, and it was on the local news. My friend's parents had the Warrens look at the house. If you aren't familiar with them, the Warrens are a famous ghost hunter who live in Connecticut. They came to the conclusion that the house was indeed haunted, and it was built over an Indian burial ground. We went to the library and checked the records, and that was true. I never slept over his house again. 2 other houses on either side of his reported hauntings and strange things as well. Another time, I was at my friend's house and was running down her hallway in her basement. I was stopped dead in my tracks by some force. I stopped so suddenly when I was running so fast that my body jerked itself backwards, about 3 inches in front of my eyes. I saw this white smoky thing fluttering up and down in one movement. It is so hard to put in words, and the feeling I got was very peaceful, believe it or not. Another experience of mine was at my cousin's house in Waterbury, in Connecticut, of course. She lives on a private drive that consists of only 5 houses, including hers. When I slept over, I always had a bad feeling. I've seen dark men walking into her basement and seen white people going the opposite way. Her remote control was missing for about 3 weeks. They searched high and low, everywhere for it. Couldn't find it anywhere. One day my uncle was taking a nap on the couch, and when he closed his eyes, he heard something drop on the kitchen table. He opened his eyes, and the remote was there. He was the only one in the house at the time. One thing that I understand is not to mess with the paranormal. Many people say that they cannot hurt you, but I do not believe that to be true. Not all of the ghosts are angels. A lot of them are demonic. My word of advice is to pray to God whenever you feel uncomfortable in a room, or even if you don't pray or you're not religious. Try to find some solitude in the fact that they can give you more power if you think about them and you fear them. Don't mess with anything unless you know what you are doing, and don't ever play with a Ouija board. That's definitely a no-no. Hello. I would like to share with you some incidents that have happened to me. In November of 2000, my family and I purchased a wonderful old house that was built back in the 1860s. Well, anyway, my first thought of the house was that it is haunted, and now that I've lived there almost a year now, I think that my thoughts have been confirmed. Incident number 1. A friend and I were up late one night, sitting in the bedroom off the living room, and we had the door open so that we could directly see into the living room, and my 2-year-old's rock and roll Elmo doll started going nuts, repeating over and over again, Elmo, Elmo, and after a few minutes of that, it finally started singing the tune it was supposed to play. Keep in mind that her and I were the only people there, and we see nothing by the doll that would cause it to do that, and the batteries were brand new. Incident number 2. While my family and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV one night, I heard some strange music coming from the fireplace room, and when I got up to investigate the music and where it was coming from, I found out that the music was coming from my locked curio box. It was my daughter's wind-up music box playing, and it played the entire song. Keep in mind that this music box has been locked in this curio cabinet for about 5 years. We did not even take it out when we moved. Incident number 3. I was in the bathroom one evening and looked over just one time to see the whole roll of toilet paper fly off the spindle, and it's happened more times since then. Incident number 4. I got up late one night to get a bottle for my newborn baby, and all that we had on that night was a nightlight, just bright enough so that you could see around the kitchen. Anyway, I get all done making her bottle and start going back up the stairs. I look over my shoulder to see the reflection of a man sitting at my kitchen table and my glass sliding doors. I ran up the stairs and was scared out of my gourd. My last story is one that kind of spooks me the most. I was about 8 months pregnant with my last child when we moved into this house, and I had her name picked out. It was Pearson Michelle. That was going to be her name. And then one night, just out of the blue, I decided to name her Pearson Amelia. My husband asked me why I made such a sudden change, and had no good explanation to give him for it. I just said I don't know, I guess. It just sounds good to me. Well, about a month after she was born, my mom called me up to tell me that she had done some history researching on the house, and to all of our amazement, a very original owner of the house is named Amelia Poole. I to this day don't know if it was just a coincidence, or maybe she had something to do with it. Well, I could go on even longer about my experiences, but these were some of the ones that stick in my mind. I live in Woodstock, Illinois with my mother, stepfather, and 3 older stepbrothers. Right now, I'm 15 years old. When I was about 5 or 6, we moved into our new home and got settled in. Now I know for being so young I shouldn't remember stuff, but in this instance, I did. I lived in the house till I was about 8 or 9 years old, and to this day, every time I pass it, I get a very uneasy feeling. The story as I heard it from my older brother is that our house was built by a preacher. He had built it for his wife, but according to the story, the preacher's wife left him for another man. The preacher stopped going to his church and stopped just plain out living. He ended up dying in the house all alone. He always wanted kids though, but to me, there seems to be something else. Let me elaborate. Any married couple that lived in the house, including my stepdad and his ex-wife, always separated. The presence of the preacher was always there. He was also very kind to children. At one point, I was running up the stairs with our dog named Pitt. I almost fell, but felt myself being caught and pushed the other way, so I fell onto the stairs and was able to catch myself. I used to try and tell myself how lucky I was to have caught my balance, That fall could have killed me. I now know that it isn't my luck at all. It was a nice man who helped me live. But there was something else. Something dark in that house. Everyone who lives there feels it. Fights used to break out between my members of family, for no apparent reason even. We could all be perfectly happy at one point, then suddenly on a whim, we all felt angry and pissed off. It was a curse on the house, I think. I pass by that house on my way home from school now. Still I shudder and have to turn away. There are 2 boards on in front of the house. We have put them up to fix the house. Those boards have been the same color since we put them up, no matter how much you paint them. No matter how much we tried to fix something, it refused. It would fix for about a day, then break or get trashed just as quick. While I remember the nice preacher who once saved my life, and many occasions I'm sure watched over me, I will never forget the deep dark presence that would scare the hell out of me whenever I was alone. I sent in a story about a week ago. That story had to do with a friend of mine, Stephanie, and her experience at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This time, I want to talk about my own experiences. About 2 weeks ago, I was snooping around at a local antiques dealer when I came across a painting I just knew was mine. It was a 19th century portrait of a young woman. She's so beautiful. She's a young Caucasian woman in a lovely full gown of a pale shade. She has brown hair, which is swept up to show her features, as well as the most incredible eyes of a very deep brown. Well, I saw her and grabbed the portrait immediately. I paid $90 for it, which is a little inexpensive for a portrait as good as this one. Anyway, I took her home and put her in my room. As soon as I had brought her home, I started to feel uneasy. She was giving me the creeps. I chalked it up to my mind running away with me and tried to ignore it. When I was getting ready for bed, I decided I couldn't stand her, and seeing that I didn't want my puppy to chew her up, I put her in the guest bedroom. I felt much better as soon as she was gone, and then I went to bed. About an hour later, I started to hear things. I swear that the door to the guest room kept opening and closing, sometimes softly, like something was looking out into the hall, sometimes with great force, so that I thought the door would be torn from its hinges. I was terrified, I won't lie. I lay in my bed with the covers over my head and reassured myself that my cat, who also slept with me, wouldn't notice anything before me. That's when the footsteps started. They just seemed to pace the hall. Sometimes they would stop for a minute, but then they would start again. This went on the whole night. It has happened subsequently every night since. I still haven't moved into my bedroom. I tried to move her in here after the first night, but then while I was trying to fall asleep, I looked over and saw a silhouette of a woman on my wall. She was staring out the window. My cat refused to move. She sat next to me and hissed all night. After that, I put her back in the guest room. She's so beautiful, I don't want to return her. There's no signature on the painting, though whomever painted it had to have been very good. I've never seen a portrait as well done as my lady. I'm at a loss as what to do. I can't take this for much longer, but I'm also not too thrilled to have whoever is unhappy in my home. What can I do? And is it really the painting that is distress? My brother and parents have heard the footsteps, but they refuse to believe it's anything other than me playing a trick. It is said that during World War II, it was used as a housing for the Royal Air Force. I'm talking about the former American military housing. During this time, there was a large storm surge in the North Sea, killing many residents in the complex. I never took much heed until I was stationed at Woodbridge, AB, while in the US Air Forces in Europe. I was assigned to housing in this complex, probably 2 months when weird things started happening. The first was small, but weird all the time. First, let me add that the doors are triple locked, bolted, chained, and key locked. Upon waking to what I thought was a cat moaning, kind of like one sounds in heat, I went downstairs to get a look and see. I did not notice anything immediately. I looked out of the kitchen door and saw nothing. It is well lighted. I turned to go towards the back door when I noticed that the cabinet doors were wide open, as well as the drawers. I shut them, then continued towards the door, looked over to my left. My stereo speakers were facing the corners in which they were placed. I then got suspicious and called for my wife to come look. We noticed that the dust surrounding the speakers were undisturbed. Not that we did not clean. The wind blows so hard off the North Sea, it constantly blows dust under the doors and around the cracks of the windows. Anyway, we laughed it off and commented that we must have had a prankster ghost. About a week or so later, I was watching TV. I still remember the show, Challenge Annika. The wind was blowing through the back door especially strong that evening, and I asked my wife if she would mind shutting the door. She was mad at me. She blurted out to tell the ghost to do it, joking as well as being sarcastic. I shouted, "Hey ghost, would you shut the door?" Amazingly, the door immediately and slowly shut. Let me remind you that these North Sea winds are strong and constant, and takes force for a man to shut. The door was old and creaked like in the old movies, but we both looked at each other and my wife, and said let's go out and eat tonight. I snatched up the keys, and we went out and ate tandoori that night. The experience seemed remarkably innocent for a while, though the small bouts of activity still startled us. It wasn't until a few days later that I got to see this prankster ghost. My wife had been away shopping. It had been in the middle of the night, 9 p.m. to be exact. I heard the front door open and slam, and initially thought that my wife had returned home. At the time, I was sitting in the living room watching television. I asked her if she needed any help with the groceries, but there was no response. Thinking that was unusual, because again, I knew I heard the front door open and slam. I got off the couch and went to the front door. To my surprise, there was nobody there, but I felt a slight breeze of cold air touch my back. Confused, I headed back to the living room, and that's what I noticed. A figure that was dressed in camouflage, reclining on the couch, staring straight ahead at the television, almost as if being frozen. When I walked into the room, I had gotten a view of him from the side. He faded pretty quickly, and he didn't seem to move, but at that moment, it felt like a lifetime. In reality, it had only been about 20 seconds. He also had his mouth open. Interestingly enough, he had the appearance of an older man. I remember feeling incredibly sick to my stomach afterwards. That was when my wife shortly returned home from her grocery shopping. Let me just say before I end this, that before these incidents, I was a true skeptic, laughing at any mention of such things. But now, I try to learn all I can on the subject. I've had many experiences with the paranormal in my life. The first time that I can recall ever having a ghostly encounter was when I was living with my aunt and uncle in Warrenton, North Carolina. I was home alone and doing my homework at the kitchen table when my golden retriever started to act a little funny. He kept jumping in front of me and growling at the back door. It was a glass sliding door leading outside to the deck. I got up because I thought that maybe he wanted to go outside, but instead, I saw the transparent head of an Indian just moving across the deck. We were living in a trailer about 5 feet off the ground, so I believe it must have been walking on the ground beneath the trailer. I screamed and jumped onto one of those freestanding freezers that we kept in the kitchen. When my mom remarried, she moved my younger brother, my younger sister, and I all the way to Cape May, New Jersey. That's when things got weird. We were living in an apartment above a hardware store, while we waited for our stepfather to get us a bigger place. My sister, stepsister, and I stayed in the same room while my brother took the living room. Every night, we could hear the sounds of a person wearing heavy boots walking on the ceiling. What got us scared was that we were as high as the building went, and there wasn't even an attic above us. Another time our parents were out, and we were all in the living room watching TV, when we heard the sounds of someone running from the front door to a computer chair in the corner. The chair spun around, and it sounded like someone jumped off of it and ran into the kitchen. The kitchen light turned off, then everything was quiet. We all kind of looked at each other, then ran into our room screaming. We all slept on the same bed that night. Things got worse when we moved. We were in the same neighborhood, just a bigger house. My mom began to experience things in the new house as well. My stepsister had a history of talking on the phone in the middle of the night, and one night, my mom swore that she heard the phone being dialed. She called for my stepsister to go to sleep, but she got no answer. So she went to her bedroom and saw that she was asleep. When she went to find out where the dialing was coming from, the phone was thrown at her from the living room. I would always hear my mom calling me, and she'd say that she wasn't. Sometimes I'd like to think that I saw my brother run into another room, but he wouldn't even be there. When my baby brother was born, it was as if he could see things that nobody else could. Sometimes he would follow things with his eyes and laugh until whatever it was went towards the basement door. Then he'd cry as if someone was hurting him. Sometimes we'd see and hear people in my brother's room, and then they'd look at us and vanish. My mom wanted to move, so we ended up moving a half an hour away from that house. The first thing that happened to me in that house was after my baby sister was born. Now there were 8 people in my family. I was babysitting her one night and was changing her diaper in our very cramped bathroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my brother enter the bathroom, and I could feel him standing behind me. When I turned to tell him to get out, nobody was there. I thought it was strange, but didn't really think much of it. I accidentally dropped the diaper onto the floor, and when I bent down to pick it up, I saw my brother's feet and legs. I jumped back, but nothing was there. I grabbed the naked baby and ran out. Then one day, I stayed after school for a party with my club. I was talking with my teacher, then I wandered off with my friends. About 5 minutes later, she came to me and asked where I went. She said that she asked me to go and get food from the back, and that I had followed her in there. But when she turned to hand me the food, I wouldn't take it. Then when she turned around again, I was gone. She didn't see me leave, even though the door was right in front of her. I thought it was probably a different girl, because I had been with my friends the whole entire time. After the party, my friend had to use the bathroom, so I went with her. When she was done, we both stood and fixed ourselves in front of the mirrors. A girl walked in and went into the stall behind me. We were going to leave, but I had to spit my gum out, so I pushed open the stall behind me. It jumped back and said sorry, because the other girl was supposed to be in there. Nobody was there. She couldn't have left, because she would have to pass both me and my friend to leave. My friend looked at me, and I knew that I wasn't going crazy. I realized when I was very young, I could see things that no one else could. It all started when a friend of mine was killed during a tornado. We were about 5 years old, and after the storm, he and his sister appeared in my bedroom. Over the years, I saw them very often, and just thought it was because I saw the tornado carry them away. But later, I discovered that was not the case. When I was 12, my family moved into an apartment complex. We had a 2-story apartment that at first seemed pretty normal. One night, I had a dream in which I kept being told to look in the attic. The problem was that the attic only had openings in the even apartments. Ours was an odd number. A short while later, I started hearing footsteps, but no one was there. One night, I followed the sound of footsteps down the stairs and into the living room. There I found an elderly lady rocking in a chair. She just walked away and disappeared. I became so used to her appearances, and it never bothered me. A few years later, we moved in with our great-grandmother and grandmother. There was a nice area of woods behind their house where we used to hike. My great-grandmother used to tell me stories of a hunter who went into these woods and ended up never coming out. As kids, we used to laugh it off as a myth. One summer's day, we went hiking with some of our friends. Once we got into the woods, I had this feeling as if something was following us. It was a scary feeling, not like any encounter I ever had. After climbing a cliff, we were walking around when something ripped my bracelet off my wrist. At this point, I convinced everyone it was time to go home. We got lost in a new trail we discovered and came across a man dressed in a white shirt and what looked to be purple pants, who appeared to be building a fire. Upon later discussion, we discovered that he fit my great-grandmother's description of the man who never came out of the woods. While this scared everyone else, I kinda knew he was just stranded. For many years, I experienced many strange events. Something would move items and then put them back, or appear before I was outside. I became used to it. It happened all my life, but in 1995, my husband and I moved into a house in London, Kentucky. This house seemed normal at first, but after a few months, we began hearing footsteps throughout the house. Then a shadow chased my sister up the stairs from the basement. It seemed to be just because it was an old house, until one morning, someone said hello to me. I was the only one awake. Everyone said I was hearing things, until one night, we left town to visit family and left our roommate home alone. As night fell, it began to storm. When the storm knocked out the power, our roommate began hearing footsteps. Then she heard someone say hello and asked where I was. At this point, she left. The next morning, I called to check on her, and someone or something picked up the phone and laid it down. I could hear voices talking, but when we got there, the house was empty. The phone was laying in the floor off the hook, and our roommate arrived home shortly after us. Her aunt told us that she had been with her all night. A few months later, we moved out and never heard anything from the new residents about hearing things. The strange thing was, a few years later, my daughter started talking to people who no one else could see. Apparently, it's a family thing. I would like to tell you some of my personal experiences with the paranormal. When I was about 10 years of age, we were living in Trinity Springs, Indiana. I lived with 3 other sisters and our mother. Will, our mother, decided to go for a walk to a friend's house that was about 5 miles, give or take a few miles. To kids, it seemed to be a long ways from home. On the way, we had passed the cemetery. It always gave us the creeps to walk near, and we would run past it. To keep the creepy feelings down, Mother would always get mad at us for doing it. When we arrived home, the door was standing wide open. Mother told us to stay outside, just in case someone was in the house. We did as we were told, and I watched the doorway in case the police needed to be called. After about 10 to 15 minutes, we all went in, ate supper, and went to bed. It was about midnight when something pulled down on the edge of the bed. I thought it was our dog wanting up under the covers with us. I stuck my foot down there to help her up. When I did, a hand grabbed my left foot. I pulled my foot back quick. Before I knew it, my foot began burning like it was on fire, and the hand rushed up my sister's leg, searching for my foot, and of course I screamed. Mother came running into the room, wondering what was wrong. I told her, and all she said was, "You just had a bad dream, so go back to sleep." She went back to bed. I jumped from our bed, all the way into the hallway. I was not willing to put my foot on the floor next to the bed. When I returned to the bedroom, I looked under the bed to see what was under there, and see nothing there. Soon as Mother was asleep, we jumped up and grabbed something to try and protect ourselves somehow. Soon as we went to sleep, this person would grab, hit, or punch us. When daylight broke, it quit, and we got a little sleep before Mother would wake us up for breakfast. When we walked into the kitchen, our mother asked us how Diana got the bruise on her arm. We told her, and she blamed us for fighting. My sisters and I told our neighbor about the experience. She told us about a home that stood in the same place that had burned down with 3 children inside, while their parents had went to town to a bar. The eldest child tried to keep the fire going because the house was getting cold. When she was putting wood into the wood stove, a piece of coal had fallen onto the floor. She hid under the bed. She thought that her parents would get mad at her for what she had done. All the children had passed away in the fire. Here's one more. When my grandmother was still around, she lived in a house that was haunted by grandfather. He had passed away in 1959 when my mother was 5 years of age from black lung because he was a coal miner. At night, you could hear him walk down to the basement and back up the steps. If he had seen that you had no covers on, he would cover you up to keep you warm and safe. My friend, his girlfriend, and myself were all sitting around watching a scary movie one night in his apartment. After the movie, we discussed supernatural things we had experienced before. Both my friend and his girlfriend said that even if the ghost of a family member appeared to them and meant no harm, they would still be horrified at the sight of it. I, on the other hand, had said that I wouldn't be, because I've had experiences as a child, and that I wasn't afraid of them. As to whether or not there were ghosts of past family members is not known to me. I was too young to remember details. I stayed a night at his apartment a few nights later. While I was laying on the couch, my friend came out from the bathroom, walked through the hallway, which is mostly visible from where he slept on the couch, and into his room. After he shut his door, it was almost completely dark. As I rolled over and faced the hallway, I saw a faint white figure of a woman from the middle of her torso on up. Her hair was short and black, and she had broad shoulders. As to whether or not she was in fact a female isn't for sure. I just got the distant feeling that what I saw was female. It stayed floating in the hallway, facing me, for a few minutes, before ultimately fading. Now honestly, I was slightly freaked out, but I didn't feel threatened. I rolled over and tried to go to sleep. A period of time that seemed like a few hours had passed, and I'd finally gotten into that half-conscious state of sleep. Slowly, I started to develop a strange feeling on my right shoulder and back. I was facing the back of the couch with my back to the hallway. I heard a calm woman's voice say, "How are you feeling?" And I responded immediately, "I'm very tired. Please let me sleep." Movement from my mouth jolted me from my sleep, and the feeling on my shoulder and back had disappeared. The next day I told my friend about what I experienced. He bursted into tears as I finished the story. To my surprise, the night was the anniversary of his mother's death. After discussing it with my friends, I wonder if it was in fact his mother, then why would she appear and speak to me and not him? They suggested that the fact that I was not afraid of the paranormal, and that I had admitted it a few nights ago, was why she came to me. This was about a month ago. Since then, strange sounds and odd visions are seen in his apartment occasionally. The slight sound of egg shakers are heard moving around the living room. I've heard it pass right over my head before and circle around in the kitchen. Santa Cruz, California, the Red Room Restaurant. This is the site of the old Santa Cruz Hotel. This is an old house, now converted into a restaurant and lounge. I had the experience there back in August 2007. I went to use the women's restroom. I went into the first stall and noticed that the toilet paper cover was opened, so I went to the next stall and noticed the same thing. So when I went back to the first stall, I closed the door. I heard footsteps, as if someone had entered the bathroom. The footsteps got louder, and it almost seemed as if someone was pacing back and forth in front of my stall. I looked under the door and realized there was no one else in the restroom other than myself. Being the logical person I am, I thought maybe it was someone walking upstairs, not even realizing there was no upstairs. Upstairs would be the roof. That's when I looked back down again and noticed the fog move past. As I was ready to open the door to my stall, I could almost feel a presence, as if someone was standing right in front of me. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt someone there, very close. I left and went back to join my part for dinner, and never said anything about it. The waitress, who was very chatty, started talking about the restaurant and the history behind it. It was an old brothel house in the 1800s. She then revealed that there was a ghost there. She said it was a ghost of a young prostitute who was very unhappy and decided to hang himself in the back room, which was now the women's restroom. I almost fell out of my chair. I just couldn't even believe it. The waitress claims that it's a friendly ghost and that she likes to mess around with people. She also claims that the ghost constantly opens toilet paper covers, and they're always having to close them. Hence, why the covers were open when I went to the stalls. I quickly told the waitress and the rest of my party what I experienced. The waitress believed me, but the rest of my party thought I was nuts. If people want to go there and experience it themselves, they should go in alone. She won't show herself to groups. I've always had weird experiences in my life that many people have never had or do not believe. The scariest one occurred when I was 12 years old. It was the spring of 1986. We lived in an old neighborhood in some cottage-type houses. One day I was home alone shortly after school, doing my homework, when suddenly I heard a man breathing very loud and deep. It sounded like he was struggling for air. I was in my room, and the restroom was across the hallway from the room, and that's where the sound was coming from. I immediately turned off the square electrical fan that I had on, thinking maybe it was malfunctioning. As soon as I turned it off, the heavy breathing got louder. There were no open windows, so it wasn't coming from the outside. I became very scared because I knew I was the only one at home, and there was certainly someone breathing very loud right outside my room. I ran out of the house as fast as I could and waited outside until my parents got home from work. My brother and sister were due to arrive as well. When my mom returned, I told her what I heard, and she totally believed me. She said that when we were into the house, they were told that a man was stabbed to death in the house. Could it have been his echo of his last moments? I guess we'll never know for sure. My name is Tracy. I'm not sure that I have a problem with the haunting, but would just like to share my story. It starts back to when I was a child. My mother and I always had this psychic connection. For instance, I never had to tell my mom what I wanted for lunch. She would just think of a few choices, and I would then walk in seconds later and give her the answer to the question that she never asked. Now, this happened just a few times. I would have washed it off to coincidence, but this happened all the time. Now, as an adult, I get to do this with my children. It's pretty neat. I always had this psychic capability, not asking for it or concentrating on it. It just happens. Well, now with a little background on me, I'll get to the good stuff. When I was about 5 years old, my parents purchased their first house from an older woman whose husband had passed away, and she was moving to Florida. Hence the reason she asked us to keep her cats. From the moment I stepped into the house, I felt watched. This feeling only increased with time, so bad that I used to get dressed under the covers. I remember it happening in my bedroom more than any other room. I didn't feel that way in the bathroom after I took a bath or something. It just seemed to be in my bedroom. Then, the nightmares started. I would wake up extremely distraught, usually having the same few nightmares over and over again. I was terrified of under my bed, so I used to jump from my bed out of my doorway and run to my parents' room on the other end of the house. I would then go to sleep on the floor by their bed. I was never afraid of under their bed, though. I didn't realize how strange that was until I got older. As I would run to their room on many occasions, I would look behind me, and I would swear I would see something chasing me. Now, I guess I left this to an overactive childhood imagination, but I found out more. When I got older, my mother told me that she used to hear voices in the attic, but upon going up there, with a knife in hand, there would never be anyone up there. There was never anyone outside either. She said that she would always feel the presence of an older man. When I was 14, my parents divorced, and I rebelled, and in short, my father got custody of us, and we got the house. My dad is very carpenter handy, so he decided to rebuild the house and increase its size. Not too long after the remodeling of the house, me and my brother were sitting on my dad's bed, with the door shut, and all of a sudden, the door handle started to jiggle, so my brother jumped up and grabbed the handle as it was jiggling, and threw the door open, and nothing. There was no one else in the house, but my brother immediately ran down the hallway to the front door, and looked outside to make sure. It's impossible that someone was there. The only original things left in the house are the original foundation and the chimney. I figured after the remodeling was done, whatever was here left. Until recently, about 2 years ago, me, my fiance, my 2 children and my brother all took the house over. One night, me and my fiance were in bed, sleeping for about 30 minutes or so, and I woke up and saw a dark shadow leaning over his chest. I yelled stop, and then went right back to sleep. The next morning, I didn't even think of it, so my fiance called me from work. He asked me why I yelled stop, and I told him that I didn't know why, that I even forgot about it. Then I told him that I did see a shadow that resembled a short, bald, heavy-set man leaning over his chest. He then told me that he woke up gasping for air, and that the dark shadow was pushing on his chest and pulling him off the bed. Then when I yelled stop, it vanished. My fiancé is not a weak man at all. He's very strong, so I knew something was going on. I felt a presence in the room for a few weeks after that, but I went into each of the rooms before bedtime and told him that he was not allowed in there. Then one night, me and my brother were on the couch talking, and I told him the story, and he was in disbelief, of course. We then both dozed off, and I got woken up to a pale-faced brother who said that he got punched in the chest and he was having a hard time breathing. I then did the same thing as before and had nothing happen since. That's the end of my story. Well, this experience takes place almost 30 years ago. It was on a cold February morning. In those days, I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning to get my husband ready for work. I remember making a fresh pot of coffee along with his breakfast and packing him a lunch for the day. He would leave the house for work at 5:30. After he would leave, I would go back to bed. But on this day, I decided to lay on the couch in the living room because I had to be up again to get the kids ready for school. As I was laying on the couch in the living room, I suddenly heard the front door open. It was in the middle of the dark. I jumped to my feet, thinking my husband returned. Maybe he was coming back for something he forgot. As I approached the door, a tall man, walked into the house. I was frightened. I backed away. I froze. Was he going to rob us? I shouted at him to leave, but he just ignored me and walked past me, as if I wasn't there. He was heading towards the kid's bedroom. I immediately ran after him, and just like that, he disappeared. I woke the kids and ran to my neighbor's house. We called the police who came and went throughout the house to make sure he was not hiding. They found no one. I was confused, no doubt, because I did see this strange man walk into this house. He was somewhat odd looking. I described him to the police as a tall man with a mustache. He was not wearing a coat, and I found it odd because it was the dead of winter, and he obviously would be cold. The police were polite and courteous, and told me to reinforce the doors with security locks, and left feeling a little like I was losing my mind. I did not just dismiss it. That night, when my husband came home from work, I told him what happened, and he too was worried, and the next day had deadbolts put in. A few months later, I was preparing a potato salad for a picnic when my elderly neighbor called me to come over her house and change a light bulb for her in her bedroom. I noticed that she had pictures. Some looked real old and spread out on her kitchen table. I sat down and started to look through a few of the pictures. Then I came across the picture of two men, one short and stocky, wearing a bowler hat, the other, a tall light-haired gentleman with a handlebar mustache. I recognized the mustachioed man immediately as the man I saw walk into my house. I asked my neighbor Phyllis who the men in the picture were, and she told me that it was her father and a friend of his. I told her that the man next to her father looked exactly like the man who walked into my house. She gave me a strange look and said, "Honey, he's been dead for over 40 years, but he used to live in your house. He was a barber, and he used one of the back bedrooms as his shop. The same room my kids shared. Could this have been the spirit of the man in the picture? I do not know." For as long as I can remember, I've been able to see and feel the paranormal. I didn't know what it was at first, and was truly terrified by the feelings I would get when someone came near me. I'm at the point where I'm no longer afraid, but I do have my moments when something sneaks up on me. Almost every home I lived in has been haunted, and I'm not sure now if they were the homes themselves, or if I'm being followed. I feel comfort in my newest home, and I'm always sure that there's nothing there, which I'm grateful for, because my son senses them too, and I'm not sure if he can still see them, but he used to be able to. He knows his uncle and grandfather, and they both died before he was born. He knew things about them that no one else told him, and as a baby, he would stare past me and start laughing at air. In time, he was able to communicate what he saw, and the truly significant moment came 2 days before his papa passed away. He went into the room his great-grandfather was resting in, and came out, It told me that there was a man in the chair, and he was there to take Papa home. My son was 2 at the time, and we did not discuss his grandfather's dying to him. We only told him that he wasn't feeling well. I knew for sure then that he was able to see and sense things as well. I've seen my brother-in-law praying beside his parents' bed a few days after he died in a snowmobile accident. He has made a clock in his grandparents' home run when it has no batteries and hasn't worked in many years. Every time someone truly missed him and wanted to know if he was there, they would ask him to make the clock go, and most times it did. I knew in my gut the instant my own father died. No one had to tell me. I had a very uneasy feeling in my stomach the night before he died, and I knew that I needed to go to him, but this feeling stopped me from getting on the plane to go home. The next morning, I knew the instant he died, and I was at my sister's house. The feeling just vanished, and I just knew. I told my sister that I had to go home, and that our dad just died, to which she pretty much told me that I was crazy, but I insisted, and I drove myself home. I don't know how I got home. I don't really remember the drive. I remember getting into my car, and this calm was over me, and I remember pulling into my driveway, and my mother-in-law was standing there waiting for me. I got out and told her that I thought my dad died. She confirmed it, and that is when I lost it. I was 5 months pregnant with my son at the time, and I believe that somehow I was being pushed to stay home, because I'm sure that I would have lost my son if I was with my dad when he died. The stress alone nearly killed me. My dad used to come to visit me. He would turn the lights on and off to let me know that he was there. I could feel him around me. It has been a while since I felt him, but I know he's still around. A duplex I lived in had 2 spirits, a man that was not good, and a woman. The woman would unlock doors in the night and turn lights on. The man did not want us there, and I sensed that especially in the basement. A few people saw and felt both, but the woman kept him in check. The only time they really made themselves known while anyone was awake was the night that my cousin and I were looking on the internet at pictures of ghosts and demons. All of a sudden, there was a loud crash from upstairs. We raced upstairs, but nothing was out of place. I got a really bad feeling and ran upstairs to my son's room and grabbed him. My husband wasn't home, but I called him to come home. My cousin and I sat in my living room freaking out when I saw the man walk by me, and he was in black with a large brim hat. My cousin saw him too, and he had never previously had an encounter. It was as if he was telling us to stay off those websites because they were not good or something. All I could even remember was the absolute terror in my heart. The orchard I grew up on was haunted by more than 3 spirits. Not all of them are good, and they made it known that we were not wanted either. One spirit had befriended our family and would try to protect us from the little girl who wanted us out of there very badly. I believe that she and the little boy were my second cousins killed in a car accident with my great-grandfather, though no one has been able to confirm that. Walking down the stairs to the basement, the same step always seemed to break, and you would trip. It never actually broke, but 7 out of 10 times, you would trip on that damn stair. I mean, anyone would trip too. Faces would appear in windows. Gunshots would ring out behind our house, and no one was there. My dad even checked for footprints a few times, because the shots were that close. The taps in the kitchen exploded once, and there were the booming noises from within the house, for no reason. I saw the spirit of the cat my dad ran over a few times, and then there were the horses and cows that periodically freaked out over something no one else could see. There was also the drifting odor of the orchard of a dead animal, though it was never in one spot, and there were no dead animals. I used to feel like there was something under the stairs to the basement. It was an old house with old wooden stairs, the kind that had no back, and under the stairs was dirt. I always had a bad feeling about that, and and would fly down the stairs as fast as I could and run them up 2 or 3 at a time. My dad had renovated the house, and my brother and I were fortunate to have bedrooms in the basement. I got locked into my room one night, and we ended up having to take the hinges off to get me out. No lock on the door. When we were moving, I was sitting on the floor in my room packing, when all of a sudden, the mirror on my dresser came crashing down, shards of glass missing me by centimeters. My friend's family rented the house from my dad for a short period of time, and one night, my friend had fallen asleep in the area of the basement by the stairs. The hissing cat woke her up, and she looked to see something clawing out of the dirt. She didn't stick around to find out what it was. A few days later, her brother came bolting into the room she was sleeping in, my old bedroom, and grabbed her arm and demanded to know if she was practicing witchcraft or something. She didn't, because he had 2 perfect bite marks on his wrist, and when they looked at her arm, she had the exact same marks as if they had been bitten by fangs or something. Of course, they left shortly after, but not because of the things they experienced. I didn't find out about any of this until after they moved. An older woman bought the orchard, and when my sister went back to visit a year or so ago, she happened to mention strange things that were happening around the orchard, and asked my sister if she knew anything about it. My sister quickly filled her in about the yellow and green orbs seen floating around the house, strange occurrences, and all the noises. The difference of what she had seen and felt was that she saw a cowboy, and we were told there was an Indian on the orchard protecting our family. Apparently, the land that my great-grandparents had settled on was once a battlefield, and our family had been told the Indian warrior died there in battle. The house we moved into after we moved off to Orchard had its own spirit or two as well. My parents didn't believe me until a few years after I moved out, and my mom had been home alone, and the front door unlocked, opened, closed, locked, and she heard footsteps move around the house and up the stairs, and then they stopped. She also heard the kitchen cupboards open and close, and kept calling out to my dad. They lived alone by this time, but no answer. This continued like this for about half an hour. My mom got scared and refused to leave her bedroom until my dad actually came home an hour after that. She blamed him, but it couldn't have been him. He was at work. This was a frequent occurrence, but previously my parents blamed my brother or myself or the other until my brother and I moved out. There was also the time my friend and I thought we would play a trick on my brother and pretend that the house had been broken into. We trashed the house nicely, placing objects around as if they had been thrown or scattered in a rush. We were standing in the kitchen laughing about this whole thing when all of a sudden a hand reached up the window. You would have to be almost 7.5 feet tall to do this. We screamed and ran up the stairs to get the cordless phone. The doorbell started ringing, and knocking on all of the windows started. We called the police, thinking that someone was actually trying to break into the house. The police heard the noises and told us to stay upstairs until they got there. My brother and a bunch of his friends walked in at this point, and we started to accuse them when there was another noise outside, and my brother went out to investigate. I saw him chase someone down the street in a plaid coat, and then the person just vanished. My friend and I were hysterical by this time, and the police had just arrived. They brought canine dogs, and the only scent they picked up was my brother's, and that is because he had chased someone out of the yard. The dogs didn't pick up anything else, and there were no footprints anywhere, except the police and ours. My dad came home, and my brother and his friends swore it wasn't them. When the morning came, we all went out to check under the kitchen window for evidence it was my brother, and there was just no way that anyone could have just reached up that way the hand reached up. There was also the time that I came home, and the upstairs extension picked up while I was on the phone. I thought my friend had someone over, or it was a party line. Small towns used to have this, where 2 different residences shared the same phone line. She thought I was trying to scare her because we could both hear breathing. I snuck to the stairs and saw the shadow of a man. I freaked out, grabbed a knife, and ran out the door. I called my sister down the street to come, and there was no way anyone could have gotten out, but no one was there when it was checked out. There was also the glowing eyes in the bushes up the street. I used to see those frequently at night, and once in a while, was brave enough to go and check it out, to see if there was a dog in the bushes, peering out. There never was, and the hairs on my neck would stand straight up on end. I wasn't the only person to see this or feel this way about those bushes. Quite a few houses in the area were haunted as well. I would hear a man's voice in the house where I babysat, and so did the girl I babysat. It was detached and floating in the air. You would feel tugs on your shirt when your neck was turned, and lights in the basement would flick on and off. A friend of mine who was completely skeptical lived in the house previously and had confided in me that she thought something weird was going on in the house. She slept upstairs, and every day she would look in the cubbyhole in the wall, and there was a sleeping bag unrolled and an imprint of a body on it, and every day she would roll it up and put it away, only to find it there in the morning again, or by the time she got home from school. She showed me this one day, which made me uneasy, talking about the babysitting job there when new people moved in. There is so much more, but honestly, I'm getting tired and drained out. If you want to hear more, let me know. My story is not very complicated. My husband, my son who is now 8, and of course me, moved into our current house a little more than 2 years ago. Once when my husband and son were spending a weekend at my brother-in-law's, I told my husband I was afraid of being alone in the house, even though I am reclusive by nature. He said to ask my guardian spirits for help. So, not really expecting anything, I said aloud before I went to bed that I would appreciate my guardian spirits for a sign they were present. Later that night, I was awakened by the sound of the doorknob on the bedroom door being turned. I looked over and actually saw it turning. I was terrified. Nothing came in, and there was no way I was going looking for the doorknob turner. At best, it was an intruder. When my husband came home, I told him all about it, and he told me that I asked for a sign, after all. About a year after we moved in, our then 2-year-old nephew came to live with us. He was very delayed and could only speak at about a 1-year-old level. We made a playroom for the kids in the basement. Josh, our nephew, refused to play down there alone. I didn't blame him. We had to totally run out of clean clothes before I'd go down there to do laundry. It was creepy, not dark at all, but there was always a feeling of being watched or someone standing close behind you. We also heard footsteps down there and water being turned on. That fall, Josh threw one of his little boots down the stairs, and my husband ordered him into the basement to pick it up. Josh reached the bottom of the stairs, turned to look into the basement, screamed ghost in mortal terror, and ran back up the stairs and shot into my husband's arms. By this time, we had named the presence Alex. Josh said Alex had made a very bad face at him. He refused to go down in the basement at all after that. We also had an incident where a broom was totally missing from our house for almost 2 weeks. I searched every inch of the house, including the basement. It wasn't in our house. We thought someone had borrowed it. No one had. Finally, I yelled down into the basement, "Alex, if you have the broom, we need it back." After a couple of minutes, and another good search of the upstairs, I went down to the basement and found the broom laying against the wall, right by the stairs. I thought I was doing pretty well with the whole having a ghost experience. Sure, I was secretly scared to death, but I kept reminding myself that there are spirits all around us, and Alex seemed to be rather mild and harmless. He even listened to my husband when Mike ordered him to stop scaring the kids, and later to stop coming upstairs. And surely, Alex had as much right to be there as I have. However, I changed my mind after taking a nap in the extra room downstairs. I was awakened with a jolt by the distinct feeling of a hand slapping me in the face. That was it for me. While we were in the car, away from the house, I told my husband Alex had to go, and since he seemed to have some authority, he had to tell Alex to leave. Mike said he'd probably have to talk to a medicine man. Luckily, however, perhaps after overhearing a similar conversation at the house, Alex left on his own. No more noises from the basement, missing household objects, or eerie feelings. In fact, after a while, my husband and I even moved our bedroom downstairs, and we never had a weird experience down there. Josh was more than willing to come downstairs, although he still does talk about Alex occasionally. We did have to move back upstairs, but that only involved a mundane little mouse running around down there. I had a friend in Arlington, Texas whose house had a ghost. Her family called it George, and they laughed about it. There was no malevolence involved. Their house was relatively new, and not particularly outstanding. It was a classic 50s ranch house. Anyway, my friend's room was always chilly. The temperature was about 65 degrees. Her family had ducked people check out the ducts to her room on several occasions, despite the blazing North Texas summers, where the central heat turned on in the winter. Her room maintained this temperature. I had heard all the stories, and didn't really know what to think. I spent the night, and that made a believer out of me. First, during dinner, things fell off of shelves in the adjacent den. Her parents laughed and yelled, "Stop it, George." Later, when I went into the kitchen for some water, the reflected view in the kitchen window started spinning. I was somewhat entranced, and then realized that the center of the spiraling image was the figure of a man. The figure was getting closer and larger. I ran into the den before I saw any more. As we went to sleep in the sleeper couch in the den, several books in the shelves opposite the couch slowly pulled out from their position on the shelf and almost fell to the floor. George is one of my fondest memories. My friend and I had other strange encounters after that, including many that didn't involve George. I think that some people are more receptive to energies and have more of these events than other people. I've decided to post my other stories now, before I forget to post them later. The first one I would like to share happened when I was 18. My friend was living with me and my family in our house in Northeast Calgary. We were sitting in our room playing cards. There had been a couple strange things happening the last few weeks, like my TV turning on and off by itself, the volume going up and down on my stereo. Since both of us had always been believers, she's always had experiences of her own. We knew it was the work of a ghost. We were never really frightened, at least not until the night I'm about to tell you about. Anyway, like I said, we were playing a game with a deck of cards. You asked the question and then flipped a card. If it was a black card, the answer was no. A red card was a yes. It was called something like Ouija cards. At first it was just a game. We were laughing and joking around at the answers it gave us, until we noticed a pattern. Every time we got to the bottom of the deck and shuffled them for the next round, the first three cards flipped were 666. The first couple of times we just brushed it off as being coincidental, but by the third, fourth, and fifth times, we were scared. We decided it was time to call it a night and picked up the cards. We made sure to check underneath ourselves and under the pillows on our bed to make sure we didn't miss any cards. We hadn't. But after gabbing for a half an hour, I was going to go downstairs to my room. Sure enough, there was a card sitting right in plain view of both of us. We looked at each other a little funny, and then she picked up the card. It was the 6 of spades. I got curious as we went to put the 6th card back with the others and flipped the 2 cards of the deck. Both of them were 6s. We put the cards in the kitchen, and on my way downstairs, I heard the TV go on. I turned to go back upstairs to tell my friend when it turned off again. I went to my room and laid down. A couple minutes later, I noticed the room had gotten brighter. I opened my eyes and saw that 6 of my candles were glowing brightly, even though no one had been in the room to light them. I blew them out and tried to go to sleep. It happened again, but this time they lit, one by one. I ran from my room, noticing it grow dark once again, and slept the rest of the night with my friend. I've never had an occurrence like that again. My most recent experience happened in January 1999. One of our dogs, CB, short for cat bait, had recently been put down. He had been a big part of the family for 15 years. One night, our other dog, Tia, came downstairs to my room. This was extremely odd, since the only time she ever came down was if I had food, or if she was with my mom. But she never came down in the dead of night. I was fast asleep when I was awoken by the sound of her barking at the end of my bed. I told her to go away and to shut up, but she persisted. I sat up and found her jumping at the end of the bed. I asked her if she wanted outside, but that's not what she wanted. She wanted me to get out of bed. Irritated, I did just that. We walked out of my room, and she started barking at the corner of the basement. I thought maybe she had found a mouse or something. But upon turning on all the lights and investigating, I found nothing. She started walking around the basement. If I did not follow her, she would bark. I was getting tired of this game and just wanted to go back to bed, but she just kept barking until I followed her. Finally, she led me into the laundry room and went over to the pile of blankets laying on the floor and started barking and switched between looking at me and staring at the sheets. It then occurred to me that the pile of blankets were one of CB's favorite spots to sleep. I remembered hearing somewhere that animals, especially cats and dogs, had a sensitivity to spirits and ghosts. I smiled and asked Tia, "Is that CB?" Immediately, her tail started wagging, and she went over to the blankets, lay down, gave them one lick, and then went back upstairs. I know it was my little dog who was visiting me that night. I'm just glad that Tia decided to share that visit with me. Since then, Tia shared it with me a couple of times, although I still haven't seen CB's ghost for myself. This story has several parts. It has taken me months to put this together in a way that makes sense and takes all the known facts into account. I awakened suddenly from deep dreamy sleep one night in December or January with the terror that someone was in my room. I've heard that in most people, there is a reflex that literally prevents them from moving when they are in a deep state of sleep, and the frozen, unable to move state described by many upon first being awakened is simply that reflex still working, not fully in sync with sudden consciousness. I'm in a different category. However, I'm a sleepwalker and capable of vigorous movement, even when not awake. To get on with the story, I felt an intrusion in my dream that had nothing to do with what I was dreaming about. It shocked me awake, and I sat up straight in my bed. I was treated to the sight of an apparition standing near the foot of my bed. It was quite tall, over 6 feet I would guess. I couldn't tell if it was male or female, but my sense was that it was female. It had short dark hair, parted in the middle and brushed back on either side, and wore flowing white garments. It emitted no light. What I could see of it was illuminated by the yard's light, shining in the bedroom window. I apparently surprised it, because for a fraction of a second, its right hand was raised to its temple in a gesture that seemed to indicate I was not supposed to have awakened or have seen it. Immediately, it was gone, leaving me to wonder if I had really just been dreaming. It all happened so quickly. In January, I visited a psychic who told me that in addition to the spirit of my grandmother, which I knew about, I had the spirit of a young girl strongly attached to me. She was not able to give me any details as to who the girl might be, and I thought about this for a great deal. For months I pondered whom this might be and got no enlightenment. Finally one day, the face of a child I used to babysit for many years ago sort of popped into my head, and I knew who my little girl attachment was. She was a tragic little figure who was a foster child in a home that cared for her, but most certainly did not love her. Even as a teenager, my heart ached for that child, and I told my mother that once the lifeline on her left palm was extremely short. I always felt she would die young. I really didn't know any facts about her, since I lost touch with her foster family after I went to college, but I had no doubt that she was my attachment. A few days after this, I went to another psychic who told me that the girl had not been ready to die when it happened. It had surprised her. For that reason, she was unable to find the lights that souls are supposed to go to when they pass. He told me that I was the only light she could find, and therefore she had attached to me. But that wasn't a good thing. She meant me no harm, but she was draining me some of my energy, and she needed to move on for her own sake as well. He spoke with her briefly and told me she was 17 and that her stepfather had caused her death, or at least a great deal of pain while she was alive, which he does correlate with what I knew of the man. Remember, she was in foster care, not living with her mother and stepfather when I knew her, but the man was a convicted child molester. The psychic told me he would go help her to the light, and I presume he was successful. Tonight I was reading some of the articles on the site about why spirits tend to manifest at night, to get a glimpse of someone they loved, perhaps, or to try to communicate, and what the best reaction to an apparition is. And I realized that 1, probably my apparition was my young friend, who I wouldn't have recognized because I hadn't seen her for about 7 years before she passed, and 2, sitting straight up in bed was a good way to scare it off, because it disappeared in the blink of an eye. If I had realized who it was, I would have tried to make things easier for her, but for both of our sakes, I hope there is no next time. In 1975, my wife's parents and her sister Mary moved to the eastern shore of Maryland into a 100-year-old farmhouse. What made them believe there was a ghost was little things disappearing and reappearing in different places, doors locking by themselves, being touched by someone who wasn't there. Things really didn't start getting weird until her other sister Cher and her son David moved in with them. Cher had a little bit of ESP. She could tell when things were going to happen. She would have dreams and funny feelings that would mostly come true. They would hear noises in the attic, footsteps, and things rolling around. Cher would hear someone calling her name at night. She had the bedroom with the attic door in it. Once, my wife felt someone sit on her bed, and Cher felt someone run their fingers through her hair. They were all outside taking photos of each other one time, and no one was in the house. But when the photos were developed, someone was looking out the pantry window. They believed the ghost was not harmful. In fact, it was very helpful. Things that they were looking for would appear. When David was a baby, he had stuffed animals in his crib. Years later, he told us that he was afraid of these stuffed animals because he thought that they were alive. Another thing that happened was when both my wife and her sister Mary got married. Both of their wedding photos that were taken in the house never turned out. They believed the ghost was sad to leave them there. In the big foyer, there was a room that had been painted black from other occupants, and whenever they would pass the room that was by a staircase, they felt as if someone was watching them go up the stairs. All 3 sisters felt this presence. I'm now a 48-year-old professional, settled in Canada, and doing very well. In northern England, as a youth, I had many experiences, mainly revolving around the house which my family bought when I was 12 years old. We were told by the neighbors that 3 families had moved out in the 18 months before we moved in, but the only explanation was that they had marriage problems. Within a year, we heard noises, such as a person banging on the door, or definite and very clear footsteps, which would walk up the stairs if you were upstairs, or down the stairs if you were down. When it first happened, I thought it was my brother, 1 year younger than myself, banging on the door, disturbing my math homework. But when he went down to complain, my parents insisted that I had not been out of the front room for an hour. The very next incident was I was awakened in the middle of the night by a tremendous racket from the bathroom, and I got up and put my trousers on to see what it was. As I left my room, my mother stood at her door, and we each asked the other if we had heard the sound. We agreed that it came from the bathroom and went to look. All that was there was an empty washing up liquid bottle, made of plastic, squashed and lying on the floor. Another night, my mother and I heard a crash, as if metal ladders had fallen outside downstairs living room, but again, there was no source for the sound when we checked. Over the years from age 12 to 18, I became familiar with these sounds and joked with school friends that we had a ghost called Jack. Some friends were in the house when the footsteps came down the stairs. I heard them, but I said nothing. No one else did. When it happened a second time, I heard it, and so did a young man named Mike, who had never heard of this story. He searched everywhere and would not accept my reassurance that no one was there. When I left to go to university, I told the next door neighbor, a middle-aged woman, that I was glad to leave. She told me that these sounds were the reason why the 3 families left in such a haste. The neighbors agreed not to tell us because they did not want to put ideas into our minds. A woman who lived there previously was found dead in the bath with her wrist slit. It was thought to be suicide, but I had a vague and reoccurring mental image of a man coming down the curved stairway. A friend later suggested that, perhaps, this man was the old woman's son. Perhaps he killed her and made it look like suicide. Who knows? One piece of advice: never try a Ouija board to communicate with the dead. Leave well enough alone. If experiences happen to you naturally, they are completely harmless, and in some cases, can be helpful. They might happen for a total of a few seconds in your whole life, but do not try to make them happen, because you might frighten yourself. This is my best advice. There are other stories, all true, but they have to wait. Wow, you've reached the end of this video, and I have to say, I'm quite impressed. Over an hour's worth of material, and it is a compilation, you know. Stories of ghost stories and frights. So if you're new, I encourage you to subscribe, or you can call me the Chicken Fighter Man. What does that mean? I have no idea. This channel has never made sense, and if you're used to my outros, have you heard them once before? You might be used to them, but you'll never get used to them. Maybe you will. I don't know. Anyway, guys, sorry. Comment, like, share, and subscribe. I really hope you enjoy this compilation. It's the great monthly compilation with the greatest stories from the past month, obviously. So go ahead, take the opportunity to share across all social media. It really helps. The support always helps, and simply just seeing you guys in the comment section just really makes me happy. So I hope to see you there. Really, there's nothing else more for me to say, almost messing up on my words. But, you know, anyway, guys, I gotta go. So comment, like, share, and subscribe. Already said that, and I meant to say good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you guys, and I hope to speak with you again soon.